What is Ethics? MPCR 5000, written and presented by Professor Scott Applegate, Georgetown University. We are going to start this course with a discussion of ethics over the next 4 weeks. One of my standing mantras is if you have a wicked cyber problem, step one is to remove the word cyber and then determine how you would solve that problem in the real world. With that in mind, we are primarily going to talk about ethics over the next few weeks and will not be overly concerned with how ethics applies to cybersecurity. Once we complete our exploration of ethics, we will then start to apply what we have learned to some of the key issues and dilemmas in cybersecurity. What is ethics? First, ethics is a branch of philosophy, and if we start here, we must also define what philosophy is as well. Philosophy is a way of thinking about questions, big questions like, what is the nature of reality? Why do we exist? Is there a God? Why are the Kardashians famous? And other questions to which there is not an answer that science can readily provide. Examples of famous moral philosophers include Socrates, Aristotle, Confucius, Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill, and many, many others. So if we define philosophy as an academic subject concerned with the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, that brings us back to our original question. What is ethics? Ethics is a branch of philosophy concerned with human conduct and behavior. It is concerned with the good. It is the philosophical study of morality. Ethics considers people's values, where they come from, if they differ over time and from place to place, and how people translate those values into behavior. The study of ethics may lead us to questions such as, do our ethics change based on the role we hold in society? Are the ethics of a child, a student, a soldier, a caregiver, a doctor, or a parent different based on their role, or do individuals maintain the same ethical values as they transition in and out of different roles throughout their lifetimes? Do you think individuals fit neatly and squarely into the ethical frameworks that are described in this course? Where do our ethics and values come from? As a child, the most obvious source would appear to be our parents and families. As we grow, we also absorb and incorporate values we learn from our friends and peers, our studies, and the careers we choose. Our religious upbringing may heavily impact the ethical values we hold. The culture and society we live within can contribute to the development of values and ethical frameworks. Finally, exposure to other cultures and other perspectives may influence the evolution of our personal moral frameworks. Good and bad life experiences can also create rapid change in a person's moral framework. How often have we heard of someone having a near-death experience and changing the direction of their life after that experience? One thing that is obvious is that our moral frameworks do change and evolve over time. The morals we held as a child are probably not the morals we held as a teenager, a young adult, or later in life. The right and the good. So, if we think of ethics as a branch of philosophy concerned with the good, then we have to have some means to determine what actually constitutes the good. Ethical theories are usually divided into two component parts, a theory of right and a theory of good. The theory of right specifies which actions help to realize or respect the good. The theory of good specifies what is valuable and worthwhile. Right and good are two basic terms of moral evaluation. In general, something is right if it is morally obligatory, or it is morally good if it is worth having or doing and enhances the life of those who possess it. Acts are often held to be morally right or wrong in respect to the action performed, but morally good or bad in virtue of their motive. It is right to help a person in distress, but good to do so from a sense of duty or sympathy. An action is generally morally right if it produces the greatest quantity of good or happiness, utilitarianism, is done for the sake of duty, deontology, or is virtuous and advances human flourishing, virtue ethics. What would any rational person believe to be worth wanting or working for? What is good? What are some examples in your life? What is an ethical dilemma? An ethical dilemma is a decision-making problem between two possible moral imperatives, neither of which is unambiguously acceptable or preferable. In other words, we're not choosing between good and bad alternatives, as that would not be a dilemma. We are choosing between the lesser of two evils. It's sometimes called an ethical paradox in moral philosophy. In most ethical dilemmas, there are several possible alternatives or courses of action. How an individual resolves an ethical dilemma is largely dependent on their individual moral and ethical beliefs. What are some examples of ethical dilemmas you may have faced in your life? Over the next few slides, we will define and explore some terminology related to ethics. Practical ethics. Practical ethics considers everyday issues we may face, such as, do I give money to the homeless? Do I want to eat meat or be a vegetarian? As an example of practical ethics, we could ask, is it moral to give money to the homeless? Some people would say it is moral to give money to the homeless. They are people in need, down on their luck, and a little money may help them make it through another day. If they get enough help, they may be able to pull themselves out of the desperate situation they are in and improve their lives. Others would say it is immoral because they will come dependent on handouts and will not work to improve their situations. We will not debate this issue here. I only bring it up as an example of practical ethics. Normative versus descriptive ethics. So the term descriptive is pretty straightforward, but what does normative mean? Normative questions are questions that do not merely ask about what occurred, how often it occurred, or about the size of a phenomenon, but questions that ask what we as humans should do in response to a phenomenon. So normative ethics is the study of how we ought to or should act. Examples of normative ethics would include this class, Ethics in Cybersecurity, and Computer Ethics. Computer ethics describes how computer professionals should act, and they are both practical and professional in nature. Descriptive ethics, on the other hand, is the study of people's belief about morality. It is describing not what we do, but why we choose to do it. It is the observation of how we make moral decisions and gain understanding about ethical behaviors in different times, places, and cultures. Objectivist versus relativist ethics. Ethics can be seen as either being objective or being relative. Objectivists see the project of ethics as identifying the right thing to do or the right action to take morally. They believe it is possible to identify solutions to ethical problems using reasoning and the tools of ethics. They believe that there are concrete answers to ethical problems which can be identified and then enacted. If killing a human being is considered an immoral act, then to a moral objectivist, there is no circumstances under which it would be permissible to kill a human being. A moral relativist believes there is no one absolute position that is right or wrong. Instead, they argue that the most moral thing to do may be determined by your own subjective perceptions. Critics of this approach often use moral relativism in a negative sense, suggesting it lets people off the hook or does not hold them morally accountable for holding morally repugnant positions. So going back to the killing of a human being as an immoral act, a relativist would likely agree that in general the killing of a human being is immoral, but that there may be circumstances where it would be morally permissible to take a human life. A relativist would be more free to look at context such as self-defense or the saving of one life through the taking of others. Moral relativists argue that as technologies advance, ethical values can change too. For example, they argue that many people today enjoy sharing on social media and no longer prize privacy as a right the way they did in the past. But objectivists argue that ethical decisions rest on core values which are stable regardless of one's environment. Ethical accountability. To whom or what are we ethically accountable? Are we accountable to society, the laws, rules, and regulations our elected officials have enacted? Are we accountable to our community and the traditions, customs, and norms we are raised with? Are we accountable to our religion and the prescriptive doctrine it lays out? Or are we ultimately accountable to ourselves and our own moral conscience? In this picture, we see a group of officers being commissioned and swearing an oath of office. Who are these newly commissioned officers swearing allegiance to? They're swearing an oath to support and defend the Constitution. So, what is the Constitution in this context? It is the social contract with the American people. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. So in this case, these individuals are accountable to the American people under our nation's preeminent social contract, the Constitution. Relationship between religion and ethics. Ethics can parallel religious belief or rest upon it, but that may not always be the case. Many religions support institutions like gender discrimination or slavery. In these cases, religion may conflict with the broader ethics like the universality of human rights. If we look at Christianity, for example, there are some fairly repugnant passages that would generally conflict with our morality today. Slaves, be subject to your masters with all reverence, not only to those who are good and equitable, but also to those who are perverse. 1 Peter 2:18. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she will not be freed at the end of 6 years as the men are. If she does not please the man who bought her, he may allow her to be bought back again. Exodus 21:7-8. Whosoever putteth away his wife and marrieth another committeth adultery. And whosoever marrieth her that is put away from her husband committeth adultery. Luke 16:18. And we have the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Thou shalt not take the name of thy Lord God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor thy father and thy mother. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet. Divorce, premarital sex, extramarital sex, and homosexuality are all equally sins in the Bible, yet they are not treated so by most Christians. Given this, we must be careful to examine the links between religion and morality. Relationship between laws and ethics. Many things are considered to be both ethically wrong and illegal. This includes acts such as property theft, child labor, murder, assault, and discrimination. Some things may be legal, but still be ethically wrong. Slavery was legal in large parts of the United States prior to the Civil War, but was clearly ethically wrong. The First Amendment gives us freedom of speech, which protects hateful and bigoted speech, but that does not make the use of racist and derogatory terms ethical. There is also a tradition of people opposing unjust laws in order to get them changed. Given this, we should examine the links between our laws and what is ethical. Are laws always ethical or moral? Is breaking the law sometimes the ethical thing to do? Role of law and ethics in cyberspace. In his book, Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, Larry Lessig first describes the 4 constraints that regulate our behavior in real space: law, norms, the market, and architecture. Spinello further adapts Lessig's framework to describe 4 constraints which regulate behavior in cyberspace: law, social norms, the market, and code, which is the architecture of cyberspace. These are resting on an underlying foundation of core moral values. We will discuss each of these constraints over the next few slides. Law. Laws, according to Lessig, are rules imposed by the government that are enforced through ex post sanctions. If we break these laws, we can be subjected to fines or other penalties levied by the government. In cyberspace, laws such as those that provide copyright and patent protection regulate behavior by prescribing certain activities and imposing ex post sanctions on the violators. It may be commonplace to download and upload copyrighted digital music, but this activity actually breaks the law. Thanks to the law's coercive pedagogy, those who get caught violating copyright laws are usually quick to reform. Think of Napster from the late 1990s. Social norms. Social norms are expressions of the community. Most communities have a well-defined sense of normalcy, which is reflected in their norms or standards of behavior. Cigar smokers are not usually welcome at most community functions. There may be no law against smoking a cigar in a particular setting, but those who try to smoke cigars will likely be stigmatized and ostracized by others. When we deviate from these norms, we are behaving in a way that is socially abnormal. What are some norms that we observe on a daily basis? Some common examples might include facing the front of the elevator. Facing the back of the elevator would be considered abnormal behavior. Flushing a toilet in a public bathroom. Spitting out gum in the urinal. Talking to yourself in public. This norm has evolved due to technology. When I was a kid, people talking to themselves in the streets were crazy. Now they're likely on a Bluetooth device on their phone. Saying hello to everyone. In a small town, this may be a common norm. In a large city, it would be considered abnormal. The market. The market regulates behavior in cyberspace through the prices it sets for goods and services or for labor. Unlike norms and laws, market forces are not an expression of the community, and they are imposed immediately, not in ex post fashion. Unless you hand over $10 at the local Starbucks, you cannot walk away with a cup of their coffee. If the market prices goods and services too high, people won't buy them. If they price too low, they may lose money and go out of business. If some goods and services are highly valued and in short supply, the market may hike the price of those goods and services to a level that only the wealthy can afford. Essentially, the market is governed by supply, demand, and what people are willing to pay for goods and services. In cyberspace, advertisers gravitate to more popular websites, which enables those sites to enhance services. The pricing policies of internet service providers determine access to the internet, and so forth. It should be noted that the constraints of the market are often different in cyberspace than they are in real space. For example, pornography is much easier and less expensive to distribute in cyberspace than it is in real space, and this increases its available supply. Architecture, or code in cyberspace. The world consists of many physical constraints on our behavior. Some of these are natural, such as the Rocky Mountains, whereas others are human constructs, such as buildings and bridges. A room without windows imposes certain constraints because no one can see outside. Once again, enforcement is not ex post, but at the same time the constraints are imposed. Moreover, this architectural constraint is self-enforcing. It does not require the intermediation of an agent who makes an arrest or who chastises a member of the community. According to Lessig, the constraints of architecture are self-executing in a way that the constraints of law, norms, and the market are not. The counterpart of architectural constraints in the physical world is software code. That is, programs and protocols that make up the internet. They too constrain and control our activities. These programs are often referred to as the architectures of cyberspace. Code, for example, limits access to certain websites by demanding a username and password. Cookie technology enables e-commerce, but compromises a consumer's privacy. Sophisticated software is deployed to filter out unsolicited commercial email or spam. Like architecture, code can be more constraining than laws, norms, or the market, as it can prevent users from doing things that are perfectly acceptable under the laws, social norms, and the market. Because of this, code or technology is sometimes considered an iron cage. Technology as an iron cage. Max Weber coined the term the iron cage to connote how technology locks us into certain ways of being or patterns of behavior. Some philosophers have long regarded technology as a dark and oppressive force that menaces our individuality and authenticity. These technological determinists see technology as an independent and dehumanizing force beyond humanity's capacity to control it. For Ellul, modern technology has irreversibly shaped the way we live, work, and interact in this world. Martin Heidegger saw technology not merely as a tool that we can manipulate, but as a way of being in the world that deeply affects how we relate to that world. Technological neutralists argue that technology is a neutral force, completely dependent on human aims and objectives. According to this viewpoint, technologies are free of bias and do not promote one type of behavior over another. Technology is only a tool and it does not compromise our human freedom or determine our destiny in any appreciable way. It is up to us whether this powerful force is used for good or ill purposes. The philosophy of technological neutralism seems problematic for several reasons. Technology does condition our choices with certain givens that are virtually impossible to fully overcome. Langdon Winter described this as a process of reverse adaptation, or the adjustment of human ends to match the character of available means. The middle ground between these extreme positions is technological realism, which holds that although technology has a force of its own, it is not independent of political or social forces. Technological realism acknowledges that technology has reconfigured our political and social reality and that it does influence human behavior in particular ways. To some extent, this notion is echoed in Lessig's work. He argues that we fail to see how sometimes code is an instrument of social and political control. Code is not neutral. Most often, embedded within code are certain value decisions that define a set of options for policy problems. People are biased. People write code, therefore people often inadvertently write bias into code. Ethical values and the digital frontier. So, if code is not neutral and inculcates certain value decisions, how do we regulate these technologies? If we look back at Spinello's enhancement of Lessig's framework, ethical values and the digital frontier. So, if code is not neutral and inculcates certain value decisions, how do we regulate these technologies? If we look back at Spinello's enhancement of Lessig's framework, in addition to the change from architecture to code, we also see that Spinello has included a foundation upon which these constraints can and should rest: core moral values. According to Spinello, the role of morality is quite evident. It must be the ultimate regulator of cyberspace that sets the boundaries for activities and policies. It should direct and harmonize the forces of law, code, the market, and social norms so that interactions and dealings will be measured, fair, and just. A moral foundation. So, we have determined that laws can sometimes be unethical. Norms are not always grounded in ethics. Given this, as we look at how to regulate behavior in cyberspace, perhaps we should consider a moral framework to guide our approach. Over the course of the next 3 weeks, we will explore 3 such moral frameworks that may serve as objective moral foundations upon which to rest the constraints of law, social norms, code, and the market. Those frameworks are consequentialism or utilitarianism, non-consequentialism or deontology, and virtue ethics. We will very briefly describe each over the next few slides. Major ethical theories. Consequentialism. Consequentialism, also known as teleological ethics or utilitarianism, focuses on the outcome that produces the highest net good. To quote Spock, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Consequentialism judges the morality of an action by the results it produces. The action that produces the best results for the most people is the moral choice. We will look at consequentialism in depth next week in Module 2. Major ethical theories. Consequentialism. Consequentialism, also known as teleological ethics or utilitarianism, focuses on the outcomes that produce the highest net good. To quote Spock, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Consequentialism judges the morality of an action by the results it produces. The action that produces the best results for the most people is the moral choice. For consequentialists, the ends justify the means. We will look at consequentialism in depth next week in Module 2. Major ethical theories. Non-consequentialism. Non-consequentialism, also known as deontology, focuses on the rightness or wrongness of the actions in and of themselves. They also focus on the need to do one's moral duty. Deontology can be characterized as duty for duty's sake. Deontology is the antithesis of consequentialism, and these two frameworks are in direct opposition to each other. Consequentialism is only concerned with the outcomes, whereas deontology is concerned with the rightness of the actions themselves. A good outcome does not justify an evil means. We will explore deontological ethics in depth during Module 3. Major ethical theories, virtue ethics. Virtue ethics, unlike consequentialism and deontology, focuses inward and emphasizes virtue of mind, character, and a sense of honesty. Actions which enhance virtue and human flourishing are considered right. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We will explore virtue ethics in depth during Module 4. Macroethics. Before concluding this presentation, I thought I would give you a little taste of an ethical theory with a very different focus than our three major ethical frameworks. Macroethics, or information ethics, is a new high-level theory specifically designed to accommodate our contemporary information age, which is so irreversibly centered on digital information. Ethicists who follow these frameworks believe that traditional moral frameworks are inadequate to address the complex moral problems of our networked information society. Luciano Floridi finds fault with these traditional approaches because they are too anthropocentric and too preoccupied with how personal actions affect other persons. Floridi's framework has three main features. It is ontocentric, ecological, and patient-centered. Floridi describes ontocentric as focusing on all entities in the universe, both animate and inanimate, as informational objects or clusters of data, and this common feature endows them with some moral value, including digital objects that exist only in cyberspace. All entities have the right to exist and should therefore not be destroyed or altered without sufficient reason. It is ecological in that it is concerned with the entire infosphere. It is patient-centered in that it is concerned with what qualifies as an object worthy of moral consideration. Floridi insists that information ethics is not meant as a substitute for traditional ethics, but as a supplement. He admits, however, that we need an ethical framework that can treat the infosphere as a new environment worth the moral attention and care of the human inforgs inhabiting it. We will not cover information ethics to any depth in this course, but I included it in this introductory discussion to illustrate an ethical theory that is not centered on human beings and their actions, but rather a unique framework that is focused on informational objects as entities with moral value and the right to exist. Summary. In this presentation, we have discussed ethics as a branch of philosophy concerned with the good. We have defined an ethical dilemma as a decision-making problem between two possible moral imperatives, neither of which is ideal. We have discussed a number of concepts related to ethics, such as practical, normative, or descriptive ethics, and we have discussed the four constraints which regulate behavior in cyberspace: law, social norms, the market, and code, and the need to rest these constraints on some form of core moral values. Finally, we very briefly discussed the three major ethical theories of consequentialism, non-consequentialism or deontology, and virtue ethics. Over the next 3 weeks, we will look at each of these major ethical theories in depth. If you have questions about this presentation or other aspects of the course, please feel free to email me or post a question in the Ask Your Instructor discussion forum in Canvas. I tend to respond to email much faster than to forum posts, but if you believe your question may be of interest to other students, then the Ask Your Instructor forum may be the more appropriate venue for your question. This has been What is Ethics? MPCR 5000, written and presented by Professor Scott D. Applegate, Georgetown University.